On January 25th, 2026, at 7:45 p.m., a Bombardier Challenger 650 business jet lifted off runway 33 at Bangor International Airport in Maine, carrying 6 people bound for Paris, a girls' trip that friends had looked forward to for months. Among them was Tara Arnold, 46, attorney and mother of 2, flying on her husband Kurt's private jet. The aircraft had repositioned from Houston that afternoon, landing in Bangor at 6:09 p.m. to refuel for the transatlantic crossing, 20 minutes at the desing pad. Standard procedures. Other aircraft departing safely. But 45 seconds after receiving takeoff clearance, air traffic control transmitted words that still echo, "Aircraft upside down, all 6 aboard died." What makes this tragedy so haunting isn't just that it happened, it's that everyone involved did everything right. Well, yet the aircraft never made it off the ground alive. The Bombardier Challenger 650 was registered to an LLC, sharing the same Houston address as Arnold and Itkin Trial Lawyers, one of Texas's most prominent personal injury firms. Kurt Arnold, founding partner, had built the practice into a powerhouse known for winning billions in verdicts and settlements. The aircraft was configured for comfortable long-range travel, 9 passenger seats in a cabin with stand-up headroom, a galley, and private lavatory. It was the kind of business jet that makes transoceanic travel feel routine. Tara Arnold, Kurt's wife and an attorney at the firm, was traveling with friends for what sources described as a girls' weekend to Paris. Joining her were Shauna Collins, an event planner who had worked with the firm, Nick Mastroscusa, described by family as a father of 3, coach and chef from Hawaii, and at least one other passenger whose identity has not been publicly confirmed. The flight crew consisted of Captain Jacob Hosmer, 47, who had joined Arnold and Itkin as a corporate pilot in May 2025, and a co-pilot whose name has not been released. The weather that Sunday evening was deteriorating as Winter Storm Fern moved through the northeast. At the time of the crash, temperatures at Bangor International Airport hovered around 2 degrees Fahrenheit with a wind chill of -13. Heavy snow and freezing fog reduced visibility to 3/4 of a mile. Winds were light from the northeast, well within normal operating limits. The National Weather Service had issued a winter storm warning predicting significant accumulation throughout the night. Despite the challenging conditions, Bangor International Airport remained open. Commercial and private aircraft continued arriving and departing. Airport Director Jose Saavedra would later emphasize that crews were on site addressing the weather event and that dealing with winter storms was routine for the facility. This was, by all appearances, a manageable operational environment. Everything looked normal until it wasn't. The Challenger had departed Houston's Hobby Airport earlier that day, arriving in Bangor at approximately 6:09 p.m. Pollard according to Flight Radar 24 data. The stop was purely logistical, a fuel stop to extend range for the transatlantic crossing to Paris. Bangor International Airport, located about 200 miles north of Boston, is one of the closest U.S. on airports to Europe and is frequently used by private jets for refueling on overseas flights. After landing, the crew would have coordinated refueling operations while monitoring the developing snowstorm. By the time they were preparing for departure, snow was falling steadily, though accumulation was just beginning. The aircraft sat on the ramp for over an hour as fuel was loaded and preparations made for the next leg. Around the same time, the Challenger crew was preparing to depart. Another significant event occurred. An Allegiant Airlines crew preparing for a Florida-bound departure aborted their takeoff. Audio posted by liveatc.net captured the pilot reporting that their desing operation had failed and visibility wasn't adequate to depart. The tower controller responded, while acknowledging he was about to warn the crew that visibility had dropped to approximately 3/4 of a mile. That Allegiant crew made the decision to return to the gate. The Challenger crew, monitoring the same frequency, would have heard this exchange. They would have understood that conditions were marginal. Their response was to taxi to the dicing pad, where the aircraft remained for approximately 20 minutes, undergoing treatment to remove ice and snow from critical surfaces. Airport officials would later confirm the plane went through standard desing procedures. After completing dacing operations, the Challenger taxied to runway 33 for departure. The crew received takeoff clearance. Standard callouts would have been made, engines stabilized, flight controls checked, instruments verified. At typical takeoff weights for a transatlantic flight with full fuel, the Challenger 650's rotation speed would be around 135 to 140 knots. V1, the go/no-go decision speed, would be slightly lower, perhaps 125 to 130 knots depending on aircraft weight and runway conditions. The engine spooled up. The aircraft began accelerating down the snow-dusted runway, but something went catastrophically wrong during or immediately after liftoff. According to the FAA's preliminary findings, the aircraft crashed under unknown circumstances on departure before it came to rest inverted and caught on fire. Flight data from tracking services suggests the aircraft reached a speed of approximately 175 miles per hour, roughly 152 knots, before veering right during takeoff and flipping. The aircraft never achieved sustained flight, and it rolled inverted and came to rest on the runway in a position that suggests loss of control during the takeoff roll or immediate post-rotation phase. In the cockpit, if the crew experienced asymmetric lift due to wing contamination, they would have felt the aircraft begin to roll. Standard responses opposite aileron rudder to maintain directional control would have been immediate and instinctive. But if one wing stalled while the other continued producing lift, the roll rate would accelerate beyond the crew's ability to counteract. At low altitude and low airspeed, there simply isn't time or energy to recover. Nearly 2.5 minutes after takeoff clearance, a controller's voice came over the frequency. All traffic is stopped on the field. All traffic is stopped on the field. Moments later, I had the stark reality. Aircraft upside down. We have a passenger aircraft upside down. I have 45 seconds. That's the window between takeoff clearance and the controller's emergency call. The Challenger traveled roughly 7,500 feet during that time, less than a mile and a half. The aircraft came to rest inverted with fire erupting from the wreckage as aviation fuel ignited in the sub-zero temperatures. First responders arrived within a minute, according to Airport Director Saavedra. The main National Guard's fire and rescue vehicles were first on scene, followed by the Bangor Fire Department and crews from approximately 10 other municipalities. But the crash was unsurvivable. According to the flight manifest, 6 people were aboard. None were transported to the hospital. All are presumed deceased. The families waiting in Paris never received the arrival they anticipated. In Houston, Kurt Arnold learned his wife wouldn't be coming home. Colin's daughter, who had spoken to her mother before the flight and heard her excitement about the European trip, would never see her again. Hosmer's family mourned the loss of a pilot they described as being in heaven now with Jesus. 3 children lost their father when Mastrascusa died. The point of no return wasn't a moment during the flight, it was the decision to attempt takeoff at all. The data tells us what happened, the question is why. The investigation immediately focused on wing contamination, ice or snow on critical aerodynamic surfaces that can catastrophically degrade performance. Aviation safety consultant Jeff Guzzetti told the Associated Press that the Bombardier Challenger 600 model has a history of problems with icing on takeoff that has caused previous crashes. The Challenger 600 series, according to Guzzetti, is very susceptible to ice contamination on the upper wing surface. The physics are unforgiving. Even frost accumulation as thin as coarse sandpaper, measured in fractions of a millimeter, can reduce lift by 30% and increase drag by 40%. Ice disrupts the smooth airflow over the wing's upper surface, causing it to separate prematurely. The wing's critical angle of attack, the point at which it stalls, decreases dramatically with contamination present. During rotation, the pilot pulls back on the control column to increase the wing's angle of attack and generate the lift needed to fly. But if contamination is present, the wing can reach its degraded stall angle before achieving flying speed. The result, one wing stalls before the other, creating an asymmetric roll that accelerates rapidly. At rotation speed with minimal altitude, recovery is virtually impossible. The Challenger had undergone de-icing treatment for 20 minutes before taxiing, but several factors could have allowed recontamination. Holdover time, the period de-icing fluid provides protection, varies based on precipitation type and intensity. In heavy snow at near zero temperatures, Type 1 fluid might provide only 10 to 15 minutes of protection. If the aircraft spent 20 minutes at the de-icing pad and additional minutes taxiing to the runway, the protection could have expired before rotation. A second theory centers on cold-soaked fuel icing. When aircraft are refueled with jet fuel that's been stored in underground tanks at freezing temperatures, the fuel chills the wing structure from the inside. The Challenger would have taken on thousands of pounds of fuel in Bangor to reach Paris, enough to significantly lower the wing's internal temperature. Snow falling on a wing chilled by sub-zero fuel can melt slightly from aerodynamic heating during taxi, then immediately refreeze into clear ice as it contacts the supercooled aluminum skin. This creates nearly invisible contamination. Frost is visible, white and granular, and relatively easy to detect during pre-contamination checks. Clear ice is treacherous precisely because it's difficult to see, especially at night in falling snow. This phenomenon has been implicated in previous accidents. The NTSB has documented cases where aircraft that appeared clean after deicing developed contamination due to cold fuel temperatures. The time between refueling and attempted takeoff becomes critical. If the Challenger was topped off shortly after landing at 6:09 p.m., the thermal mass of that fuel would have kept the wing skin cold throughout the deicing operation and beyond. The investigation will examine fuel temperature data from the Bangor fuel farm, refueling records, and the timeline between fueling and departure. If cold-soaked fuel contributed to recontamination, it would explain how an aircraft that underwent proper deicing could still have compromised wings at rotation. A third possibility, less discussed but worth considering, involves the crew's risk assessment in deteriorating conditions. The Allegiant crew's decision to abort provides a critical data point. An airline captain with routine Bangor operations chose not to depart because deicing had failed and visibility was inadequate. That pilot recognized conditions had crossed a threshold where standard procedures were no longer sufficient. The Challenger crew heard that radio call. They understood another professional had assessed conditions as unsuitable for departure, yet they proceeded with their own deicing and takeoff. This doesn't indicate recklessness, it reflects the complex decision-making inherent in commercial aviation, particularly for private operators under different regulatory frameworks than scheduled airlines. Business aviation operates under Part 91 regulations, which provide more operational flexibility than the Part 121 rules governing airlines. There's no dispatcher to provide an independent risk assessment. The decision rests with the pilot in command. Schedule pressures for a transoceanic flight may have influenced judgment. Returning to the gate meant significant delays, possibly an overnight stay in Bangor with accommodations needed for passengers. The crew's pre-contamination check, the tactile and visual inspection after deicing, apparently indicated the aircraft was clean. Other jets were departing successfully. The tower hadn't closed the runway. Every external cue suggested operations were acceptable. Only in retrospect does the Allegiant crew's warning reveal itself as the signal that something had fundamentally changed. When I examine all available evidence, wing contamination emerges as the most likely proximate cause, but with critical human factors components. The Challenger 650's documented vulnerability to upper wing icing, combined with environmental conditions conducive to contamination and the aircraft's behavior during takeoff, rolling inverted suggests asymmetric lift, all point toward one or both wings stalling during or immediately after rotation. Whether the contamination resulted from inadequate deicing, expired holdover time, cold-soaked fuel effects, or some combination remains for the NTSB to determine. What's clear is that despite following standard procedures, the crew departed with compromised aerodynamic performance that became catastrophic at rotation. The investigation will focus on several key questions. First, what was the actual condition of the wing surfaces at the moment of takeoff? Recovery of wing structure may reveal evidence of ice or frost contamination. Second, was the pre-contamination check adequate for the conditions? The challenge of detecting clear ice at night in falling snow cannot be overstated. Third, how did the crew assess the risk presented by the Allegiant abort and the deteriorating weather? The NTSB will examine the cockpit voice recorder if it survived the fire, though preliminary reports don't confirm its condition. Flight data recorders on business jets may provide information about control inputs, engine performance, and the aircraft's attitude during the accident sequence, but there's something else that's been bothering me about those final 45 seconds. In the Challenger cockpit, Captain Hosmer would have been making decisions under extraordinary time pressure with incomplete information. He'd been hired by Arnold and Itkin only 8 months earlier. While his exact flight experience isn't publicly known, operating a transcontinental private flight suggests professional competence and appropriate ratings. The pre-flight environment would have been complex, passengers expecting to depart, weather deteriorating but still within operational limits, other aircraft continuing operations, the Allegiant abort providing a warning signal that required assessment. The decision to proceed after thorough deicing suggests the crew believed they had adequately addressed contamination concerns. But simulator training for wing contamination scenarios rarely captures the subtlety of real-world icing. Simulators can replicate the aerodynamic degradation, the sluggish controls, and the reduced climb performance, but they can't replicate the sensory challenge of conducting a pre-contamination check in darkness with snow falling and temperatures at 2 degrees Fahrenheit. They can't replicate the pressure of passengers waiting, fuel loaded, clearance received, runway available.
The gap between training and reality becomes apparent in these marginal situations. Pilots train for binary scenarios: contaminated or clean, go or no go. Real operations present gradients. How much contamination is too much? How rapidly can conditions deteriorate? When do you make the call to abort despite pressure to depart? These are judgment calls that even experienced professionals struggle to calibrate in the moment. The Bombardier Challenger 650 is an evolution of the Challenger 600 series. First launched in 1980 by Canadair and later acquired by Bombardier. It's a wide-bodied business jet configured for 9 to 11 passengers, featuring a stand-up cabin and transcontinental range. More than 1,000 Challenger 600 series aircraft have been delivered, and the type remains popular for charter and corporate operations. But the model has a documented vulnerability. The Federal Aviation Administration issued an airworthiness directive in 2008 requiring specific warnings in the flight manual for the Challenger 600 regarding winter weather and takeoff safety. The directive followed 3 incidents in Canada where crews lost control during takeoff in cold weather conditions. According to the FAA, even small amounts of ice, frost, or slush on the wings could cause pilots to lose control during takeoff. Aviation consultant Guzzetti noted that the Challenger 600 has been involved in similar takeoff accidents in previous decades. The investigation will examine whether the 2008 Airworthiness Directive adequately addressed the icing vulnerability or whether additional modifications or procedures are warranted. Bombardier issued a statement expressing deep sadness about the crash and committing to work with investigators, but declined further comment pending investigation findings. Beyond immediate technical factors, the accident raises systemic questions about cold weather operations. Why was the runway open for departures when conditions had deteriorated to the point where airline crews were aborting? From a regulatory standpoint, the airport was operating within acceptable parameters. Visibility at 3/4 of a mile, while poor, exceeded minimums for takeoff. Wind speeds were modest, runway crews were actively treating surfaces, but regulatory minimums establish legal thresholds, not necessarily safe conditions for all aircraft types in all situations. The Challenger's specific vulnerability meant that conditions acceptable for other aircraft might not be safe for it. This creates a cognitive trap for pilots. External cues suggest normalcy. The airport is open, other planes are departing, ATC is issuing clearances, yet aircraft-specific vulnerabilities require more conservative decision-making. The accident also highlights challenges unique to business aviation. Part 91 operations lack the multi-layered safety systems of scheduled airlines. There's no dispatcher providing independent weather assessment. There's no chief pilot overseeing operational decisions. The flight crew bears sole responsibility for go/no-go determinations, often with schedule pressures that airlines might be better positioned to absorb. A TC audio reviewed by CBS News reveals pilots and controllers discussing poor visibility in the minutes before the accident, confirming that multiple crews were aware conditions were marginal. The question becomes, at what point does awareness translate into action? Every accident is a chain of events. Break one link, recognize holdover time has expired, detect subtle contamination, heed the Allegiant warning, and 6 people return to their families. For pilots operating in winter conditions, this accident demands renewed commitment to conservative decision-making. First, understand your aircraft's specific vulnerabilities. And if you're flying a Challenger 600 series or any aircraft with known cold weather sensitivities, extra caution isn't optional. It's mandatory. The 2008 FAA directive exists because this aircraft type has demonstrated vulnerability to wing contamination. Second, perform tactile pre-contamination checks, not just visual inspections. In darkness with falling snow, your hand provides more reliable information than your eyes. Run your hand across the wing's leading edge and upper surface. If it feels anything other than perfectly smooth, if there's roughness, granularity, or unusual coldness suggesting frost formation, return for retreatment regardless of schedule pressure. Third, respect holdover times religiously. When precipitation is falling, the clock starts the moment desing is complete. Factor in taxi time to the runway. And if you're approaching the holdover limit, communicate with ATC to request priority for immediate takeoff or return to the desing pad. Schedule pressure is never worth the risk. Finally, when you hear another crew aborting for weather, especially an experienced airline crew at their home airport, treat it as a critical warning signal. Their risk assessment is informed by current local conditions. They're not being timid, they're being appropriately cautious. That Allegiant crew made the right call.
Consider seriously whether you should follow their lead. 6 people died in the Bangor crash. Tara Arnold, 46, attorney and mother of 2 from Louisiana, who graduated magna cum laude from Tulane Law School and dedicated her practice to helping victims of offshore accidents. Shauna Collins, an event planner remembered as a light that brightened our days, with a beautiful spirit that lifted everyone she met. Nick Mastroscusa, father of 3, coach, friend, and chef from Hawaii, described by family for his kindness and dedication. Captain Jacob Hosmer, 47, experienced pilot and loving husband and phenomenal father, who friends said was always kind, always laughing. And 2 others whose names have not been publicly released, but who left families mourning their absence. These weren't statistics, they were professionals heading to Paris for a weekend together, crew members doing their jobs, people with families who expected them home. Harris County Commissioner Leslie Briones, who knew the Arnolds from her time working at the firm, remembered Tara as a phenomenal person, a bold leader, and somebody who had a heart of service. The NTSB investigation will take up to a year to complete. A preliminary report outlining basic facts should be released within a month, but final findings with probable cause determination likely won't be published for more than a year. When that report arrives, it will contain recommendations about cold weather operations, pre-contamination procedures, and perhaps guidance for pilots about recognizing when conditions exceed their aircraft's limitations. We owe these 6 people more than analysis. We owe them prevention. The fragility of flight, the fact that invisible contamination can defeat decades of engineering and professional training, demands our humility and constant vigilance. Understanding what happened in those 45 seconds might prevent the next cold weather tragedy.